And we love Tim. Tim's one of the owners of the Hideout. I don't think he even introduced himself this time. But this is a tradition at First Tuesdays. Tim sort of warms things up, if that's what you want to call it. And then we give him shit for it. But we're very thankful because Tim invited us, what was it, 5 years ago or something, to start having this event.
4 years ago? 5 years ago, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so here we still are. And so welcome to First Tuesdays, everybody. Thank you for all of those who are returning, and thank you for all those who are here for the first time. We appreciate you coming out. I'm Mick Dumke. I'm with ProPublica Illinois.
And I'm Ben Jarofsky with The Reader and The Ben Jarofsky Show. He mentioned TIF, so, Mick, I can't resist. Sorry, I just have to say, what he was trying to say is that, all right, Tim, if you're in the room, this is what you were trying to say, that after the city council approved the Lincoln Yard TIF deal, very shortly thereafter, two organizations filed suit in circuit court, a Raise Your Hand Coalition and the Grassroots Collaborative, arguing that the TIF was racially discriminatory because so much of the money was going to a white area. That was the argument that they made. The city's response, instead of just looking the other way and letting the case play out, and this will remind you of a certain parking meter deal. The city's response, this is Lori Lightfoot's city, I can't blame it on Rahm, was to send lawyers into court, into circuit court, to argue that the case be dismissed on the grounds that the plaintiffs did not have standing. And so right now, both sides have presented briefs arguing that point, and the judge has to make a ruling. I think he's going to make it within the next week or so. Tomorrow he's making is that what he's going to make? I don't know. He's going to make, very soon, this judge has to render a decision on that very specific matter of whether the case should be tossed out because the plaintiffs don't have standing. So there you go.
And what you're saying is, you're explaining what Tim's saying, and now I'm explaining what you're saying, is this is how we roll here, is that Lori Lightfoot, who campaigned against Lincoln Yards and the deal and the agreement to basically subsidize a wealthy developer building a wealthy development in a well-off area using money that was supposed to go to reversing blight, has now sent city lawyers to fight this lawsuit.
That is correct.
Which wants to stop it.
Yes.
So
your tax dollars are being used to fight the lawsuit that, if it were successful, would save you $1.3 billion. So there you go. And think about that in terms of the coming budget debate, everybody, where all the aldermen in the Chicago City Council and the mayor will all be telling you how vigorously they're fighting to protect you from having to pay more in property taxes. As they're saying that, their lawyers are in court, you're footing their bill, to fight this lawsuit. So there you go. That's what Tim was trying to say.
So we didn't come here tonight to talk about TIFs, though we always do talk about TIFs because
the drop of a hat.
Ben talks about TIFs. That's just what he does. Yeah. But we're very excited to have a couple of my colleagues from ProPublica Illinois joining us. This is Melissa Sanchez and Jody Cohen. Thanks to both of you guys for coming. And last month, Ben and I had a couple of great guests who were able to initiate a conversation among the whole group who was here about some parts of the healthcare system. And so we were joking throughout that we had solved healthcare.
Yes, we did solve it.
Mm-hmm. We just solved the whole thing, which is, of course, is why one of our guests came up with more information for us.
It's a great sheet. Yeah.
It's a great sheet. In some ways,
great
noting all the things we got wrong, or some of the things we got wrong. And we appreciate that. But we're here to solve immigration tonight, right?
That's what I promised on Facebook. So we got about an hour to get it done. So let's get to work.
Well, first of all, we like to tell everybody who's here who is sitting at the table with us. So, Jody, I'll put you on the spot first. Who are you? How did you end up in this place? You can go longer than the Twitter version, but you don't have to go Tim Tutton length either.
I'll try the current Twitter version as opposed to last year's Twitter account. Okay, so I have been at ProPublica Illinois since it started, which was about 2 years ago now. And prior to that, I worked at the Chicago Tribune for about 14 years, and I mostly covered higher education. So I wrote a lot about the University of Illinois. Um, I wrote a lot about the College of DuPage right before I left, Chicago State. Anyway, I know a lot about higher ed. And last summer, along with Melissa and our colleague Dua, we wrote about immigration during the zero tolerance period.
Sorry about that.
So I'm Melissa, and I was just realizing today's the day after Labor Day, and I started at ProPublica the day after Labor Day 2 years ago. I had a 13 weeks before that. I had a child, and so I took that time off. So I started a little bit after Jody and Mick. I was at the Chicago Reporter and Catalyst before that. These are nonprofit magazines. One is no longer in existence. I covered education mostly. And before that, I was in Miami at the Miami Herald and El Nuevo Herald doing a lot of political and crazy hijinks stuff. And for a few years before that, I was in Yakima, Washington, which is in eastern Washington state, so east of the Cascades, covering immigration and farm workers.
Right. Well, last year, two of you and our other colleague Dua came out with this story where you basically outlined how kids were being held in shelters scattered around the Chicago area, although until you looked into it, most people didn't even know, including some of the neighbors, that these shelters were there. And they were being held for sometimes months, sometimes longer than a year. And some of them had been separated from their families at the border during this border crisis that in some ways was created or at least escalated by the administration. Tell us a little bit more about the story and how you came at it.
Sure. So it started, you might remember last summer during Zero Tolerance ProPublica. So we're in Illinois. There's ProPublica. Headquarters is in New York. It's been around for 10 years. And a reporter there, Ginger Thompson, had obtained audio of a child, a very young girl who was detained calling out for her mom. And does anyone recall this? And okay, so Zero tolerance was part of the national discussion, but that really brought it to really a different level. And ProPublica has done some of the best reporting on immigration. And there was a discussion that started in New York about we should publicize or show where all of these detention facilities for children are located throughout the country because they are so secret. And Illinois, we joined in that effort to find out where the facilities were located here in the Chicago area. There had been some reporting on them in the past, but really not very much, considering that they'd been around for decades, like 20 years, the first one. And we set out to figure out where they were and as much as we could about them. So it started with the question of where are they, and then what could we tell people about these very secret places?
And initially, it was just to put dots on a map.
Yes.
We were just putting dots on the map for Illinois. We weren't planning to do a story.
Because a lot of the locations nationally were known. So ProPublica had this map, and there were dots all around the country. And where on Illinois, it was unknown, 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 unknown. So we were aiming to make those places known, just like we were trying to do that around the country. It was just harder initially here.
So when you put the dots on the map, where were they?
Let's see if I remember what they all are. There's 2 in Rogers Park. There's 1 in Bronzeville. There's 1 in Beverly. There's 1 in Englewood. So not the neighborhoods you might expect, shelters that are full of mostly Latino kids and a lot of Southeast Asian kids in Illinois. And then there were 4 in Des Plaines, and those got shut down earlier this year. And and all of the ones I just mentioned are run by Heartland, which is one of the most beloved nonprofit do-gooder organizations in the state. And then separately, Maryville, which is part of the Catholic Church, they had a shelter in Bartlett, I think, and one in They had two in Bartlett, one in Bartlett, one in Des Plaines, and now they're planning to open one more in Des Plaines, which they might have already opened, and they were going to open another one in Lakeview.
So what can you tell us about how did you do it? How did you get the dots? You didn't open the phone. There are no phone books, but how did you find it out?
Okay, so ProPublica did what we like to call what we call a call out, which is reaching out to the public to get information. And ProPublica did a call out asking for people to respond with information. What did they know about where shelters were located or what was happening there? Were they an employee? Did they know a child there? So there was a big call out for information, and then there were some people who responded from Illinois. We followed up with them, and then we did public records searches that helped us locate some of the places, and then once we thought we had the addresses, we were able to file some Freedom of Information Act requests with the Chicago Police Department and the suburban police departments and DCFS, the fire marshal, anything we could to get information about those addresses. But until we had the addresses, we couldn't go deeper to get that information. So.
And when you got the addresses, what did you find?
Well, I think Jody and Dua, I wasn't on it in the first days of looking for where to put the dots on the map. They rented a car and drove to the addresses and saw children and talked to neighbors who thought that they might be schools or people had no idea what the buildings were next door. And it's worth saying that the buildings don't look, I mean, I don't know what's in your head when you think of a shelter, but the vast majority of them look like houses. They look like nice homes. There's one, the biggest one, how many kids? Like 300 kids?
It can hold like 200.
200?
About 200, 250 maybe?
The one in Bronzeville is in a big like a senior living center, and the signs still say that that's what it is. But if you go in the back, there's a fence that you can kind of peek through, and you can see all these kids, and it's right across the street from a school. And so people knew that there were children of some sort living there. I talked to a gardener across the street from the Beverly one, and he just thought it was like a Catholic church or something. But I think initially that's what we were doing. It was just confirming these are the addresses, and we went back to Heartland and we're like, here's the addresses. We're going to put dots on a map, and they were horrified because the reason that they the reason they keep the addresses secret is sort of the same logic that they use for domestic violence shelters. Like, you want to protect the women, you want to make sure that they're safe. And so they told us that the kids there a lot of them were fleeing persecution or violence or rape, and they were afraid that if the addresses got published, the kids would be hurt somehow. And then with all of the, the crazy reaction to our president and some of the statements he makes, like there was some validity to, like we were actually kind of worried for a minute, like maybe somebody will go in and do something to the kids in these places. So there was a lot of concerns about, do we publish these addresses or not? But ultimately, the more we learned, especially as the records from DCFS and the police came back, we realized that these are places that house children, some as young as a month or two old, and there isn't enough staffing. The kids are not don't always get the services that they probably should, that you would probably want for your own kids. There's been all sorts of problems at these places, so we thought it was valuable to publish the addresses so people could know what's happening in their own neighborhoods and with their tax dollars.
Before we get to the conditions in these shelters, you both have alluded to the concept of zero tolerance. Why don't you explain to people what zero tolerance means in this case?
So zero tolerance, that the government would have zero tolerance for people crossing over.
Our mics are ringing a little bit. Is there anything you can do about that? Thanks.
Under this policy that officially started last spring, so a year and a half ago, the government started separating parents from their children at the border when they'd come in, and there's been this. It's in the past, it's been a lot of like young men who have come across the border, and more recently, there's been a lot of families from Central America who've been crossing, and so the Trump administration thought that by separating like mothers from their kids, that might be a deterrent, and so people wouldn't come with their kids, because previously if you came with your kid, then you were typically like, they took down the information about you and then let you go relatively fast, because the government isn't really equipped to detain families. So there's detention facilities for families, but there's not a lot of them. But under the Trump administration's zero tolerance policy, they separated the kids from their parents. So they put the parents in like adult jails and the kids to places like the Heartland shelters here in Illinois. And so that did create a lot of that created a lot of problems. But that policy officially started early in the spring, although unofficially it started months earlier. We actually found a kid from Brazil who had been brought in the summer of 2017, and as of just a few months ago, he was still at a shelter, who had been separated from his dad. But and then after Ginger released that audio, I think within days the Trump administration officially stopped that policy, although unofficially it has continued to a lesser extent. But I think there's still been hundreds of separations the government has documented of parents and their kids.
Wait.
And we wrote about it just recently again to update what was going on here. And there were, at that moment, there were 15 children who had recently been separated from their parents, even though zero tolerance is officially over. So it's
including
still,
babies.
Yeah, and there was a 2-month, someone, yeah, and very young.
And that's 15 in the Chicago
And that's
area.
just in the Chicago area, but yeah, hundreds. There's been documented that there are hundreds of children who've been separated since zero tolerance ended officially last June.
So the tolerance is to tolerate any immigrant. Is that it? We're not going to tolerate any immigrants, even if they're a month old.
Well, it was that they weren't going to tolerate any families or parents. They were not going to tolerate parents coming over in ways that were not authorized. They were not going to have no tolerance.
So allowing a parent to live with his or her child would in some way be condoning the act of the parent coming illegally into the United States of America, and they weren't going to tolerate that in any way. And the way they were going to show they're not tolerating it is to lock the kid up.
They were going to prosecute the parents. Is what they were going to have no tolerance for it. So they were going to prosecute the parents, and by prosecuting the adults, the children had to go somewhere, and the children therefore were going to children-only facilities.
And this language is really complicated, and I've stumbled a lot kind of in how I've described some of this in the past. But like, we have to remember that these aren't necessarily people crossing over illegally. Like, I don't even know what that means. But a lot of these families are the reason that they're coming with their kids, the reason that they're coming is because they're trying to get asylum. And so, asylum seekers, we don't typically think of them as crossing illegally, but they're trying to come to a different country for protection. So a lot of the people who are coming, including a lot of the kids at the shelters here in Chicago, because we've seen their records, are coming because they have been raped wherever they're from. There's a lot of kids from Central America, a lot of Guatemalan kids. There's a huge gang problem. Some of these countries are very unsafe. We spoke with a woman whose niece was in a shelter in the Bronzeville one for a few months, whose neighbor's daughter had been raped with a broomstick, and so the mother was afraid that the same thing would happen to her own kid, who was like 7 or 8, and so that's what they told us was the reason for why they came. And so they're trying to flee like crazy gang violence in their home countries, and they're trying to seek asylum. Asylum is not an option as much as it used to be, and so yeah, crossing illegally, it's semantics.
Yeah, no, but they're important semantics, and I appreciate you spelling it out. In a little contrast, how would these people who have just come to the United States been treated during the Obama days?
So the same thing was happening under Obama, and like, I want to make sure that's super clear to everybody. Like, Trump says a lot of crazy things and he makes a lot of us mad, but Obama was known in like the immigrant rights community as like the deporter in chief, because he deported more people than Trump has. Like, he deported more people than any president previously. And there was a similar crisis at the border. I forget when was that, like 2010, with families and kids. But Trump has taken it to another level, like the separation. There were separations previously, not quite to the level as we're seeing with Trump, and definitely not as much gloating about it as we saw in Obama's time.
I mean, hasn't separation been a policy that's been pursued? It's like been presented as a disincentive. I mean, aren't we hearing that Stephen Miller, the architect of a lot of, everybody likes him here, very popular, the architect of a lot of the Trump administration's policies, that supposedly this was one of his ideas or one of the things he pushed, that this will, if people are coming here seeking asylum, families, these caravans, whatever, that this is one more disincentive.
For sure. But we should note that this was happening, it has been happening in different ways for years. One of the problems is, like, a lot of families in Latin America, the parents might actually live here in the US and the kids live back home. And so when they cross over, they might be crossing over with their aunt or their uncle or, you know, some other relative or friend. And those children have for decades been separated from that adult who might not be a nuclear family, but there has been separations. But under Trump, yeah, that has been a very explicit policy, and that was not the case in the past.
Can you talk a little bit about dealing with Heartland? As you said, Melissa, you described them as a do-gooder organization. I know when I was reporting on immigration a little bit at the Sun-Times, they were a source of ours. They connected us with people who were caught in the bizarro world of our immigration system. And certainly the public perception has been one that they have been advocates for years for immigrants and other groups. What was it like dealing with them, and what can you say about about them and the shelters?
What can I say? So I think you're right. Heartland in the past was not a target, so to speak, of an investigation. I think they were not used to being in that role, or in that position, I should say. So they did answer, they did talk with us, they did answer questions. There's some things they, would say they can't answer because of privacy, which didn't necessarily make sense to me. Like, we wanted to just confirm at one point that that a bunch of children had run away from one of their facilities, and they refused to even address any questions about it. And I'm not sure that they were protecting anyone's privacy by doing that. So they answered some questions. They, did not answer others.
Yeah, and a lot of people who work in immigration activism, or who do that as a side thing, have gone through Heartland at some point in their life. A lot of the people in my personal network have either know somebody or have once worked at a Heartland shelter, and they do work for the homeless and for they do healthcare.
You're talking about the Heartland Alliance, not the Heartland Institute.
The Heartland Alliance.
Yeah.
The Heartland Alliance.
Heartland
Yes,
Institute
right.
is like
Big
a
difference, yeah.
right-wing, libertarian thing.
Yeah, so the
And
Heartland
under
Alliance
Heartland
is
Alliance,
like
they have all these
liberal.
other
Yeah, they have
divisions.
7 or 8
Yeah.
or 10 subsidiaries. One of them is a National Immigrant Justice Center, which does the work that you talk about with. They are constantly putting out press releases, and there's great stories being written about all the good work they're doing to help refugees, and they've taken political stances against the Trump administration and all of this. So it was really delicate to deal with them, because they kind of are the good guys, but at the same time, as we started interviewing people who work in these places, they signed up to work there because they wanted to be the good guys. They wanted to work with kids. They wanted to help immigrant kids. That's what every single person we talked to told us, that they took a job there that pays crap in order to help immigrant children, because they're they're liberals. and without fail, every single one told us that they ended up feeling like a prison guard. That they did not think they were going to go to a place and guard children from running away. And so there was a lot of internal conflict within the staff, the former staff, and that was kind of the same thing as an institution. There was an internal reckoning, what are we doing? We're doing this because we're not the GEO Group. We're not a for-profit shitty prison company that that's trying to save money and cut corners. We're doing this because we want to offer a more humanitarian version of care. It's shelters, it's not detention, right? But at the end of the day, you're dealing with kids who are adolescents, who are almost 18, who came to this country probably to work or whatever, and they have plans. then they're stuck in this place. They can't leave. If they run away, they're like arrested by police. So they feel like they're in a jail, especially if they're there for months or years. So it was really complicated.
How many children are we talking about
So right now, there are about 400
in Illinois?
in Chicago, in the Chicago area, in
In the
Heartland.
Chicago
There were
area.
375 last month, I want to say, in Heartland, and then another 50 or 60 that were part of Maryville.
And did you actually get into the buildings themselves?
Oh, no way.
Yeah, no way, that's
No,
right.
but,
Yeah. That'd be the
you know, like Melissa said, we would go outside and you could see children in the windows and they would they were waving and, yeah. One thing was with the Bronzeville one, the really big one, that there's a, like shoe store on the corner there, and in the back there's like a garden in the back of the shoe store, and sometimes when the kids on the field they're playing volleyball or soccer, the ball would go over into the shoe store's backyard, and they would throw it back, and the people who owned the shoe store had no idea who the children were. They thought it was like a group home or something. But
So if officially the policy of zero tolerance was abolished after ProPublica came out with its stories and they had the tape. We're talking about 2018. Am I on the calendar right?
like the summer of 20.
20, yeah, it's all coming together. So if officially the policy of zero tolerance has been abandoned, what is our government's official policy toward minors who are in this country, quote unquote, illegally, and then are caught?
So kids are not adults, so they're not supposed to be put in adult facilities. That's why the shelter system exists. That dates back to, I think, the 80s. There was a big case, it's known as the Flores case, and I think it was like some Salvadoran girls who were in a crappy situation with adults. So they, so the big difference is like the federal, there's a lot of branches, there's a lot of pieces to the federal government. Homeland Security runs ICE and like, Customs and Border Patrol, which have protection, which has like the really, really terrible facilities down by the border. And so kids are not supposed to be sent there. They're not supposed to be there for longer than 72 hours in adult facilities. That's recently changed, but like 2 weeks ago. But so kids are sent to facilities that are administered by the Department of Health and Human Services under the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And it's mostly nonprofits. I think it's mostly nonprofits that run these facilities all over the country. But nonprofit, it's like a weird term because it makes you think that it's like they're doing good, but at the same time, sometimes the CEOs are making like $800,000 a year. I'm not referring to Heartland here, but like Southwest Keys and other organizations. So the kids are supposed to get an education while they're there. That doesn't really happen. I've talked to a number of the teachers at these places that say it's really impossible to educate kids who are coming in a lot of you are probably teachers that are coming in at very different levels. And their education background is all over the place, and kids are kind of coming and going, so it's hard to actually teach more than worksheets. Kids are supposed to have access to like health care. That's mediocre. What are you going to say?
Lawyers. Supposed to have access to lawyers.
And the lawyers are paid for by Heartland because Heartland has the National Immigrant Justice Center, so they send their lawyers in, which we found was kind of a conflict of interest because there's been kids who've complained about conditions in the shelters to their lawyers, who then turn around and tell Heartland, hey, this kid complained about the conditions of the shelters. So there's not a lot of like independent lawyering that takes place in there.
And they're supposed to be assigned a caseworker, like a reunification specialist who is supposed to then find a place for the child to go as quickly as possible. So that is either with a relative who the child was coming to the country to, go live with, or a family friend, or if that fails, then they try to find someone to sponsor them or go into a foster care situation. And one thing that we found, and it's been reported a lot, is that the length of time in these facilities has just spiked. So under Obama, it was lower. 30 days? It was like, yeah, in the 30-some days. I think the goal is for them not to be there for more than a month.
So in other words, under Obama, after 30 days, they deported them.
No, went to live with someone in the country,
Just wanna
within
make
the
that
United
clear.
States, while their case
Was
was
it the porter in
adjudicated.
chief?
No, while their case was adjudicated in court. So they would go and live with someone while waiting to have their asylum case heard. And, you know, their hope to stay in the United States permanently. So those numbers have just gone up a lot. Especially last summer, they were, I can't remember offhand now,
Like
maybe
in the 60, 70 days?
70 days. Now it's down to like in the mid-50s, but there's supposed to be, in addition to all the education, legal, there's supposed to be someone who is working to get that child somewhere out of that, what's supposed to be a short-term detention stay.
And one of the reasons for the delays is that under the Trump administration, so the kids are supposed to go to sponsors, and the sponsor is typically a relative, and often they're here illegally, you know. And under Trump, they instituted a policy where every single person in the household where the kid was going to go to had to submit to fingerprinting. That information got shared, you know, with Homeland Security. And then you started seeing families that had tried to get a kid out of a shelter, you know, like their niece or their nephew, and they started getting deported. And so that created a lot of fear. And so families stopped agreeing to take these kids, and then that meant that the kids were there longer, and that meant that there was a backlog. So there's like all these, normally there's a cycle of kids in and out, in and out, in and out, but then kids were stuck in these shelters longer. And so what that meant is there were fewer spaces in the entire shelter system in the country, and there's like 100 and some shelters. There were fewer like seats available. And so kids were stuck in Border Patrol facilities longer. And then that 72-hour rule that I mentioned, like it kind of got thrown out the window. And we saw recently reports from the Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security finding that kids were there for weeks at a time with adults in like not shelters, in jails that were really cold, that had, you know, there was, people didn't have access to sanitary conditions or food.
Toothbrushes,
Or
no
diapers.
they couldn't bathe, they could, yeah.
And then they were
Yeah.
coming here sick,
Sick,
some of
right.
them, right? You guys reported on that.
Right, so when the children were stuck at Border Patrol facilities for longer times, they were then outbreaks of chickenpox, tuberculosis, and other diseases, and they were coming to Chicago, to the Heartland facilities sick, and also more traumatized, you know, just having been, in addition to the long journey to get to the United States and all the trauma leading up to that journey to get here, then they were stuck in these Border Patrol facilities for long times, and they were, you know, getting ill and.
Well, what's happened since you started reporting on this? I mean, you mentioned that the average time that the children are held has gone down a little bit. Has anything else changed? Is there no end in sight to what we're seeing here?
Well, some things have changed here in Chicago. Like Heartland had that group of 4 facilities and displays. It was all on one campus. And those were where really we saw a lot of the problems, and they decided to close those. They have added more training for staff. They relied on temp workers in the past because they didn't have enough staffing and they couldn't fill slots. They say they no longer employ temp workers. There's some other changes.
And so like immigrant rights activists here in Chicago saw that as a victory. Like we got Heartland to shut down 4 shelters. But I keep thinking it's like whack-a-mole, like 4 shelters were shut down here. But then Maryville, that organization is part of the Catholic Church, says, oh my God, there's all these kids at the border, we need to help them. And so they're opening 2. So it's like, big picture, I don't really know. I mean, I don't see anything changing, big picture, that's gonna make conditions better for kids.
Yeah, and what you're talking about here, I mean, what we're talking about is obviously they're children. I understand they have privacy rights beyond what adults have even, but they're out of sight. I mean, that's what the stories really started to highlight is, I mean, I had a major contribution to your first story by biking over to one of the sites and taking a picture to fact check something. But yeah, it was just like a house on the street in the neighborhood. You never would have known. There's like an aerobics studio or dance studio like 2 doors down. You wouldn't have known about it if someone hadn't told you. And so it's all hidden in plain sight, all of what you're describing here. So lest we completely despair, I'm just wondering if there's any where does this end, or what's next? Are you guys staying on the story? What are you looking at next?
So it's hard, like, a lot of the reporting that we did, we used public records, but it only gets us parts of it, and we can't go inside, so we'd go to immigration court and try to talk to kids, or, which was always dicey. But a lot of our sources are people who work inside of the shelters who are really sick of what they're seeing. But there's a lot of turnover because they can't keep doing this work. So there's some stories we've been kind of eyeing in regards to conditions and negligence at one of the shelters. But they're really, really hard to nail down because we can't talk to the kids. So we can talk to workers, but we have to protect the workers because we don't want them to get fired. And so we have to rely on public records, which take a long time. DCFS is currently investigating an incident that I've known about for a couple of months now at one of the shelters. And Mick knows I've been FOIA-ing CPD and DCFS, and we get redacted reports back. And so we have to figure out how do we get the narratives of what we actually know is happening, like in these records in some form. So we're monitoring. I think there's a lot of immigration stories to do. It's not just the shelters. The shelters are just a few hundred kids. They happen to be very vulnerable because nobody even knows where they are. They don't know where they are. So we're keeping tabs on our people in these places.
Well, tying it into the conversation we had last month was about healthcare. I'm speaking for myself here. I feel that the healthcare system we have in this country is utterly insane, makes no sense whatsoever. And I'm looking for a politician running for president who will advocate a change in that. And part of the conversation we had last month, with that would be impractical because you would turn off voters in swing states who would be so concerned about losing their private insurance for a public plan that they would end up voting for Donald Trump. And so it would be counterproductive. When I take that same argument, take that same argument and apply it to the immigration issue, to me the most obvious solution to the immigration issue would be to decriminalize the act of coming over the border illegally, and so that parents aren't forced to be incarcerated, and you're not separating kids from their parents. I've just solved the problem. I told you I could solve the problem. When that was suggested in the Democratic debates, some Democrats said yes, they were for decriminalization, and some said they weren't. And then immediately, like a healthcare backlash was, the Democratic Party is crazy to sign on to decriminalization because they're going to lose swing voters in Michigan and Wisconsin who are all going to vote for Donald Trump because that's far too radical. So it's very
It also became a thing of, oh, look, the Democrats are all favoring open borders. So it's not just criticism of what they said, it's also people taking it whole.
Yeah, so they distort. The Republicans will
take
always
your health care away.
Yeah, right. The Republicans will always distort whatever the position the Democrats have. So I can
Democrats have never distorted anything.
No,
so.
but I don't really care when Democrats distort on behalf. That's not my problem. My problem is when Republicans distort, we end up with Donald Trump. So, the Democrats have retreated from that. Are there any policies out there that you know that the Democrats are advocating on this front that could solve this problem?
I don't know. I don't think I want to speak to federal policies, and there's so many different proposals. But I will say that it was not too long ago when Republicans were proposing like massive immigration reform. Right? I mean, like under Bush, like there was the gang of 6, gang of 8. How many was it?
Gang of 8.
Gang of 8. I mean, like, just a few years ago, like both sides of the aisle were agreeing to like broader immigration reforms. At the moment, it wasn't like a crisis on the border, but the fact that we've got like 11, 12 million undocumented people living in this country. The agriculture industry like wants this desperately. Business wants this, but I don't know.
Wait, agriculture and business want what?
Want immigration reform because they depend on a workforce that's composed of immigrants who work for cheap, but they need steady work. My parents were visiting. My parents live in Mexico a few months ago, and they were telling me that my dad's building a house. He went back to Mexico and he built a house. And the guy they were using to build a house, there were two guys, but the main guy was waiting to hear back on a job in the US. And I was like, oh, where's he gonna go work? Most of my family lives in Michigan. I'm like, maybe the whole village, like everybody from the village went to the same place in Michigan. And I was like, is he going to Detroit? No, he was going to like Georgia. And I'm like, why is he going to Georgia? Like nobody from the village is going to Georgia. Like, oh, he's got a job there. I'm like, what's going on? The employer, some construction company, was paying the $10,000 coyote fee to bring this guy over because he was so desperate for like a good laborer. I was like, what the hell? I'm like, if this is somebody I know, so I can't do a story about this, right? But like employers are like facilitating the illegal immigration of people because they're desperate for workers who are more exploitable, who are cheaper, who are more dependable because of all their vulnerabilities. I'm kind of blabbing.
No, you're absolutely telling the truth. It's very similar to healthcare, where you have a situation where it makes no sense, the policy that we have, but everybody's so afraid of the political backlash that's, to a large degree, stirred up by Donald Trump, that they're scared to take a strong stand.
I want to get to audience questions in a second. Let me ask you, Ben, do you believe we should have an open border?
Me?
Yeah.
Okay, so at the risk of having my beliefs attached to any poor Democratic candidate that I support, hell yeah. I don't understand. I've never understood. How do I articulate this? I don't believe anybody can honestly give me a reason why this is quote unquote a crisis or a problem. In the state of Illinois.
That's not really what I asked, but go ahead.
No, so if it's not a problem, why should I object to open borders? And the great Neil Muhammad, who is a really smart guy, who ran for Congress in the 16th Congressional District, he put it this way, he goes, well, they don't close borders to capital, do they? Like, money can flow from Mexico to the United States all the time. Why are we closing it to labor? I was like, I didn't have an answer for that.
There are a lot of rules for the flow of capital and the flow of goods, and you can argue whether that's a good thing or not, but
well, you could have,
the flow of
let's put it this way,
labor?
it gets back to like when we first started doing articles about legalizing marijuana. And I said, as a general principle, we should legalize marijuana. And then people go, well, what about kids buying it? I'm like, okay, you can put a rule that a kid can't buy it. I mean, that's your job, Kelly Cassidy. Figure out some rules and Heather Staines.
Because no teenager had ever bought weed.
Yeah, right. So I mean, they act like these things are just insurmountable. You can't, come up with a practical policy. And so I personally I don't have any problem with the concept of open borders at all. I'd love to hear what everybody in this room thinks about it.
One other question about your reporting. Any local or state officials weigh in on what you guys had found, or did people just kind of stay away?
Let me think. I remember Duckworth went out to visit in Des Plaines, as it's, I can't remember who.
It was complicated because last summer with all the national outcry, there was also some stories about a kid being sedated at one of the Des Plaines shelters. So that happened kind of as we were doing our reporting. So I don't know if that predated our reporting, but nobody has come out.
Around that time.
But nobody really came out afterward and were like, because of this report, like we're horrified by the conditions. People have been really reluctant to say anything negative about Heartland.
And I don't know what the answers are. I'm obviously not an expert on this like you guys are. I'm not an expert in any way and don't advocate a particular policy, but it just seems local and state officials don't have control over the Trump administration. They don't have control over what's happening at the border, but they do have regulatory powers over institutions in the state. And so it just seems like somebody should be paying attention to this.
But remember, it's DCFS. We can't expect a whole lot from that agency.
The views and opinions of Melissa Sanchez are those of Melissa Sanchez. Frank?
Well, there was also that raid on the poultry plant in Mississippi where I think ISIS raided that poultry plant, and also the U.S. immigration system is still very Cold War, because if you take the citizenship test, they literally will ask you still if you're a member of the Communist Party or not.
You do still ask that question?
Yes, they still do ask that question.
Which is so bizarre because Donald Trump's favorite country is North Korea right now. So it's very.
I thought you were going with Russia, but either
Right,
way,
either
yeah.
way.
I thought it was gonna be Russia.
Well, Russia's not a communist country anymore, but anyway, his second favorite country is North Korea.
Right. Who else does have a question?
As of late last year, the ACLU's primary lawsuit was to get the federal government, to abide by the Flores ruling, which means the government had to find a home or a sponsor for the kids after 20 days. Do you know what the latest status of that suit is?
No, but it's definitely not being complied with. I don't. I haven't followed that.
I think they do regular check-ins with the judge in California, but I don't know what right, I think that's where the case is based. I'm pretty sure it's in California, but I don't know what the latest, is either.
But I mean, like the Trump administration too, created their own policies. They're gonna just put more families in shelters together for longer. No, I thought. Wasn't that what happened just a couple of weeks ago?
They want to end the Flores agreement.
By instituting policy to supersede the agreement.
But you know, in many ways, not to give Trump too much credit for anything, the only reason this has become an issue is because he is so grotesque in his behavior with his tweeting and with Stephen Miller's obsessive, trying to demonizing immigrants who come to this country. And so that forced just normal human beings to respond in reaction, in shock and outrage and protest, and that has consequently forced it's forcing the Democratic Party, it's really still much in transition, to try to come up with a policy. And given the fact that the official policy of the Obama administration was not much better in a practical way than Donald Trump, it's a very awkward situation. Do you follow what I'm saying? Because suddenly you expose yourself to the accusation of hypocrisy. Oh, you only oppose these immigration policies when it's Donald Trump. You tolerate them when Barack Obama did it, and now the Democrats are trying to figure stuff out.
Yeah, I mean, so I worked in Washington State a few years ago under Obama. What was it? In 2010, there was so you mentioned the Mississippi raid of the poultry factory or whatever it's called. I wrote about something similar in the middle of Washington State. There was a grower. It was called Gebber's Farms, and they have the fruit, and then they have the packing warehouses and all of that. And at the time, they weren't doing raids. They were doing like ICE audits, like the checks of the I-9s, and they typically don't go after employers, but they went after this kind of as a symbol. They went after two big companies that year, American Apparel in LA, and they went after like a sweatshop. And then this company that was based, it was like a company town, and they checked the I-9s of everybody who worked there, and everybody didn't have like real I-9s, and so they fired everybody. They didn't deport them, but it was a huge problem for that community and like for agriculture. Like there weren't workers who would do the work. And I think what happened a few years later was all the growers in that area started using the guest worker program, and they would bring in Jamaican workers, which was really interesting. But I don't remember how I got started on this.
No, I don't know how you got started either, but listening to you talk about it reminded me of Rob Perel. I don't know if everybody in this room knows who he is, the demographer, and he talks about demographic changes in Chicago, and the impact of this crackdown, this zero tolerance, will stem the tide of immigrants coming to Chicago, which it was ironic. Again, Lori Lightfoot in her budget address, I'm sorry, her State of the City
address.
I'm sorry, her first 100 days address was just my joke. Was saying that one thing we're going to try to change in the city of Chicago is the decline of population. And so much of the decline of population is based on the fact that there was fewer immigrants coming to Chicago. So it has an impact here in the city as well.
One thing this is not related to that, but kind of is, that just to note, is that the children don't get to choose, like, that they come to a Chicago shelter. So it's, they don't send children to Chicago because the family member they want to be living with lives in the Chicago area. I mean, it's just because there's a bed there, and you can see when the children are released, they're released to places, homes all across the country, Florida, Texas, California, New Jersey. I mean, it doesn't matter. So just they're not here in Chicago because they have places to go in Chicago.
It's basically total happenstance.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
it's not.
amazing. Who else?
Hi, I'm Regan Burke, and I just wanted to say I believe in open borders too, and nobody ever says that anymore. Like it's a dirty word, like socialized medicine, you know? I understand why we don't have open borders, I understand why. But in a cosmic kind of world, or maybe you and I are idealistic on this, but I don't think so. I think just like anything else, like the pot, you know, you can set up rules and regulations, and of course, we've never had open borders, but in the history of the United States, you know, it's been a really ugly part of our history. So maybe it's time.
Well, I don't see the movement for it at all. And when again, the comparison to healthcare, I see a thriving movement for universal healthcare. Last month when we had our show, I would say majority of the people in the audience were for some kind of universal health care. I don't see the comparable thing with immigration, and maybe that's because it's so new to Americans. They're just confronting, you know, they didn't pay attention to the issue when Obama was the president. I remember Luis Gutierrez, Congressman Gutierrez, would be criticizing Obama all the time, and other Democrats would be saying, don't criticize him too much. It's going to jeopardize Obama's vote in 2012 election. It's going to hurt the Democrats. And Obama won re-election, and the Democrats lost the Senate, so it really didn't help the Democrats all that much.
He did do the dream.
You know, Frank, that's why I have you here. Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay.
They kept the Senate in 2012. Republicans kept the House.
And then they took the Senate in
Look,
2014.
It becomes an issue. It becomes a news story and an issue when one group or the other, in recent history, the Republicans decide they need something. I mean, it was in my memory at least, the modern debate and series of crackdowns over immigration started after 9/11. And you started hearing these stories about, even though, you know, it was people from the Middle East who were responsible for the 9/11 attack, you heard these no-match raids where they were going to places of employment and, you know, demanding records to see if people's Social Security numbers had a match to the official system. They had waves of this stuff after 9/11 for years. So I remember looking at the federal data, it like spiked in the 2000s, and it started to go down a little bit. And, you know, prosecutions, those are prosecution numbers. The deportation numbers, a whole nother set of data. It's a confusing system I mean, we're simplifying in a lot of ways, but it actually is kind of a confusing system. Maybe it should be simplified. Maybe that is one of the many problems with it. But this is a show about politics. This all comes down to politics. That's what this is about. When there is fear of a foreign danger or foreign enemies of one way, shape, or form, then, you know, immigration crackdowns come along with the xenophobia. That's just really what happens.
Hi, my name's Ellen Corley, and I got kind of a comment based on your conversation, which I appreciate. My theory is that, like, federalism, you know, the Federalist Party, based on my own experience around 2001, I know political people in New York, the Federalist Society they have a lot of control over the party platform, especially the Republican. But it seems to me that these are become political issues. They pick wedge issues that are going to divide and enable them to divide and conquer the country. So it's all politics rather than policy. So, you know, it's not, like when you talked about reform, immigration reform, even as we watch it over the years, it didn't make sense that this political idea of immigration reform was really honestly about reform in the traditional sense of the word. But my real I heard that 1913, before that, there were open borders, that all these immigration border laws kind of came in 1913, along with privatization of Federal Reserve and Republican takeover plots and things. But so it's a great, you can divide us into states' rights. It's, you know, the states' right thing is really going on. It's a great way to divide the country and keep 26 red states, 24, and our political voice doesn't work. So my best solution is somebody like Ben Joravsky should run for president. An actual, somebody, everybody knows who you are,
Yeah,
and
no,
you
it's
know,
not that.
it's like a public intellectual. We don't have that anymore. They can't make it into either party.
He's going to end the
That
show
is
right now.
Definitely never going to happen.
TIFs are an issue that could take you to the White House, Ben. I'm telling you.
Tips in healthcare. Tips in healthcare.
Hello. So, quick question that's relevant. What do you all make of the recent moves and increasing calls to try to end birthright citizenship, either as that relates to people who are born on military bases or to people born on American soil? Because, of course, you know, there's some level of reaction to the resistance on some of the policy changes, but that is probably the one that seems the most extreme. What is your, I guess, outlook on how that particular play could turn out?
To be honest, I don't even like read all of these stories because I just feel like it's like just one crazy idea after another. It feels like a lot of xenophobia, like people, I don't know. I don't see that one happening, but who knows? I don't know.
I don't see it happening either, but it's a good point because that's how the risk of blaming the Republicans, Mick. They push the conversation further and further and further, and Democrats always try to accommodate and find themselves moving closer and closer. And so it was so outrageous when Trump, I don't know if he announced it through a tweet or a babbling in front of a helicopter like he does all the time. I can't remember when but he put it out there, and it was the president of the United States putting it out there. And so it's just a step to like a law proposed or maybe a constitutional amendment. Yeah, constitutional amendment.
It's not going to happen anytime soon, but you're right. It's a deliberate political strategy. It fires up certain people, and over the last generation, for sure, I think that the right, i.e. the Republican Party, although the Republican Party a lot of times has followed the right-wing ideologues who are pushing this stuff, but rhetorically they've taken over the conversation to push stuff that seemed to be a given during the New Deal and beyond the 40s through the 60s and 70s when Democrats controlled most of the policy agenda in Washington. It's been a systematic attempt by the right and by the Republican Party to push back on all that stuff. So stuff that seemed to be a given, let's just throw it out there. We're going to start the conversation that way. I will say there are certain other issues where the left or libertarians or other people have done the same thing. I mean, we're just talking, Ben and I mention legalizing weed almost as often as we talk about TIFs on the show. But, you know, that was a thing that was considered crazy not that long ago. And there were a handful of people who were just like, it's not going to happen until you start talking about it and you make it seem normal. And there's certainly a school of thought that the push for medical marijuana, while it's benefited a lot of people, also politically was a way to make this seem palatable, to show everybody the sky isn't falling when we have some sort of legal regime for marijuana consumption, and once you do that, then it's a lot easier to convince people. So I think this is just, again, part of the tug of war of politics, which the right has been better at for at least a generation, my whole lifetime.
Yeah, listen, just the marijuana one is so classic because when we first started talking about it, nobody wanted to talk about it. And you were talking about Democrats. So here you have, to use Derek's example, you have Donald Trump willing to push it to the extreme with getting rid of birthright. We couldn't find a Democrat to talk openly, except for John Fritchie, about even considering legalizing marijuana. It just proves the point how cautious and cowardly the Democratic Party is.
But on the upside, it also proves how quickly the conversation can change. So if we're looking for some specks of optimism here,
Okay.
you know, if you're a strategist
Specs,
on the other
yeah.
side, you need to push the conversation another way because it really can change. Who's next?
Hello. Marijuana aside, a question I have is, I remember last summer all of the pushback and the outcry about the zero tolerance policy. There were marches, there were lots of things. This summer, again, we had Congress people visiting facilities in Texas. We had a lot of heat around the Democratic debates in Miami. What changed over the year, and what has changed from then until now?
The issues were slightly different from last summer to the recent attention, because last summer it was about zero tolerance, and then the more recent attention was about the problems at the border facilities.
Yeah, I'm trying
I
to
mean, I
think if there were more people.
Clarification. I know the policy issue changed,
Oh.
but practically, has anything
Yeah.
changed in the
Oh.
facilities?
I'm trying to think. There's more people. I think Border Patrol is like more inundated with people. I'm not exactly sure why. I don't know if it has to do with like the shelter stays being longer, so there's being less beds. There's more people trying to come. I mean, that's kind of getting stopped a little bit in Mexico, and now Mexico is probably where we should be paying attention to, because if we think the facilities here are crap, like in Mexico, they're really, really terrible. But I don't have a really good answer to that. Sometimes I wonder like what the hell is going on? Like, because yeah, like sometimes a headline will happen and then everybody goes to it and that's the big thing and you don't even know where it started. I don't know your answer.
I mean, the system seems to be backlogged. That's sort of the takeaway, right? I mean, it's maybe a slowdown of people a slight slowdown of the numbers of people coming to the border, but like you said, not necessarily resolving their cases. And this gets to, I mean, there's been attempts or talk from the administration of cutting out any kind of due process or court process. And there are immigration courts, which, by the way, don't have the same set of rules as regular courts of law, other courts of law. You don't have to have an attorney. There's no requirement an attorney be present for someone who's up before an immigration judge. I believe the judges are all appointed, right? It's just a completely different, like, parallel justice system, and even that, as weak as the system is, there have been attempts to chip away at that as well. So I think it's just you're seeing a system that's totally backlogged. We're not going to let anybody in. We're going to lock them up. We're going to send the kids around the country wherever we can find a bed. But what does this mean? Stephen Miller's theory is that at some point in time, people are going to get the message and they're going to stop coming. And there has been slowdown, but they haven't stopped coming. So we just got more people jammed up. That's what my perception is.
Trying to decertify the immigration judge union. He's trying to bust it.
Well, there you can do 2 for 1. You can go anti-union and attack the immigration system all at once. Who else? We have a few other questions over here.
Hi, Brendan. I had a question for the journalist who had spent time looking at Heartland specifically. I was wondering if in your research you found out sort of how this beloved do-gooder organization got into the game of housing children in the first place for this particular set of agencies, and like how that funding actually gets sort of, I guess, allocated, and whether like the other dots on the map sort of match Heartland's profile, or what other kinds of organizations are like competing or participating in this system that people might want to be aware of.
Those are a lot of good questions. Let's see. So I believe that Heartland got into this business of housing children because they thought they were, or they think that they're helping children, right? That this is a place, they're providing shelter and care, and they, like as Melissa said earlier, they're better equipped to do it than a big business for-profit company. It is a big business. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't remember the exact figures offhand, but Heartland, I think, has received more funds than any agency outside of Texas. So I think it was like number 4 or 5, yeah, maybe 4 or 5 in the last fiscal year of reporting, that they had more, they were receiving more money to do this than any place outside Texas, than any place other than Texas. So I think it started because they believe that they have the ability to do it and do it in a humane way. There have been lots of stories about other places like Southwest Keys in particular, and some other organizations and problems there.
I think one of the differences between Heartland and some of the other organizations that do this kind of work is that Heartland does a lot. Some of the other main business of Heartland.
Years. Long
Like
before,
I think it's
Kids who are like men who are here to work and support their families, and now it's kids, like really small kids, like women with babies, toddlers by themselves because they've been separated from whoever, and Heartland, like all of these organizations, was just not built to take care of them, and the staff is paid crap. They don't know what they're doing. Like, I mean, I talked to workers who were frustrated because they hadn't bathed babies in days because there wasn't enough staff to watch the other kids at the same time while they took, and so for all the stuff that we've written about Heartland, it's happening all over the country, and like these places were just not equipped to deal with this. They don't have, nobody's ever articulated to us the argument that they don't have enough money to do it. They might be banned by their contracts from talking about it, but they clearly aren't paying enough staff, paying them well enough. They don't have enough bodies in there to take care of the kids. And then this all gets exacerbated with these like crazy policies that come one after another, after another, after another. And you have all these traumatized, crying kids in your facilities who are separated from mom and dad, and people are just flipping out, and they don't know how to deal with them. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just to clear, so are they under some kind of standing contract?
Yeah,
Yes.
there's a contract with the Office of Refugee Resettlement.
And that's something that we asked for, and someone asked earlier, like how did Heartland react? Like, they would not give us that contract. So
It took like 5 months, not 5 months through FOIA to get it, right?
right through the government. I don't even think we got all of it, all parts of it. But it was things like that that were just like, the lack of transparency was so, difficult and frustrating.
up here. We have time for one or two more.
I wanted to use my shirt because I'm not sick. I'm transitioning from Celsius to Fahrenheit. So last year I was a field director on a congressional race in Michigan, where I had a volunteer who voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary, then voted for Trump in the general, and then voted for my candidate, who is a Jewish American woman from Oakland County in Michigan. So my question to you all is, what would be if you could create immigration policy where we had people coming into the United States, what would be your key targets of admission to the country, and then how would you persuade that to voters in swing states like Michigan and Pennsylvania? I mean, I know there's like 8, so I won't name them all.
I don't know if we're the audience for that question. We're all journalists. I don't think we're going to probably talk about policy platforms.
Well, I will. And that's a great question. I don't have an answer for it. unfortunately. I got to answer for everything, but because, I mean, I wasn't kidding when I said I don't see it as a problem. And I never thought immigration, just from a guy who lives in Chicago, Mick's always telling me I'm so Chicago-centric, but it's true. Like, immigrants in Chicago, there's just such a great community. I'm not saying every immigrant in the city of Chicago is perfect, you know what I'm saying? But they're no worse than just people who've been here for 3, 4 generations. So the wrong audience to ask that question, because I never thought this was a problem. And I really don't know, and I say this all the time, why people in like North Dakota and South Dakota care about this. Those states are so underpopulated. You understand what I'm saying? I don't know why people in Michigan care about this, for that matter. What's that? Unions. Well, everything ultimately is about cutting taxes and destroying unions. So if they could stir people up against, create a phony issue like a crisis of immigration, then if that will enable Republicans in Michigan to destroy the public unions there, then that's what they'll do. I don't know. Yeah, it's a right to work state, and that's probably why it went to Trump. So that's what I'm struggling with. I listened to the Democrats and Castro at the first debate, where he was the one who sounded so logical on this issue. He said, let's just decriminalize it so that we don't have to separate children from parents, and you could still have a process where you're evaluating their asylum request, but you don't have to separate them. And it made all the sense in the world. And then within a week, all these middle-of-the-road mainstream Democrats are saying, oh, we're going to lose Michigan to Trump now. You know, I'm like, Democrats can't believe it, and they just retreat immediately. The first salvo comes in, they go scurrying that way. So I just thought it would start with what Castro said. Made absolutely all the sense in the world to me. But as Mick's right, I'm just some guy who lives in the city of Chicago.
That's one of the reasons why I asked, because when I lived there, I lived in Hamtramck, which is the only Muslim majority city in the country, and it was like a mixture of just like Polish Americans and people from Southwest Asia. So even seeing like the immigration issue there come ahead was just.
Yeah, I mean, Eastern Michigan has been depopulated by the so-called white ethnics for decades now, and you know, has had a lot of Middle Eastern immigrants. I mean, it's you know, so it's complicated or interesting there too. The only thing I'll add is I don't have an answer to your question either, but just to say that the quota system of our immigration policies is totally absurd and has been pretty much from the history of the country since there has been a quota system. It has never made any kind of sense. You know, one thing everyone thinks about the 60s with the civil rights laws, but another thing that happened was changing the immigration laws to the extent that there were certain numbers of people from certain countries who were allowed in legally where they hadn't been before. But it's not like it was open. It's not like there was necessarily, you know, some logic descended on that system. You know, then as the Trump administration is crowing about now, it was people who were highly educated who have much better opportunity to come here and so forth and so on. So I just think it's been insane for a very long time.
And it's gonna like keep getting worse because people are gonna keep coming. Like in Central America, you can't like farm the land anymore. Like our economic policy and our climate policies have really screwed over these countries, and they have to go somewhere because they can't survive where they're at. So we gotta deal with it.
And I do think your question gets to the heart of thing. The challenge for the Democratic Party is to figure out a policy that they have, because the Democratic Party, as far as I can tell, does not have a unified policy or a unified approach. It's just opposition to Donald Trump and his ugly rhetoric, which may be enough to win the next election.
I don't think it's a bad strategy myself.
Yeah.
If you're a
Just
Democrat.
opposition,
If you're a Democrat.
Yeah.
All right, we're out of time here. Thanks so much to Jody and Melissa for coming, first of all. Thanks to all of you for all your great questions. As is typical, we have no idea what we're doing next month.
I've decided, all right, without having run it by, we're definitely going to be talking about Chicago's budget next time. We got to talk about Chicago. bring it back to Chicago's budget. Because after Lori's great speech, I'm all stirred and fired up to talk about it.
Some irony might have been there. All right. Thanks for coming, everybody. We'll see you next round.